So just as the student is expected to observe certain etiquette and protocol, the teacher should also keep a number of things in mind. And he begins by saying, from those etiquettes, if you will, is that the teacher has compassion for the students and treats them like his own, like his own sons and daughters. And that the teacher, and this is the teacher of sacred knowledge, does not seek payment for teaching. And this was the traditional view. And of course, in order to keep one's intention pure, that you don't take it for your trade, meaning that's how you earn your livelihood, but rather you seek the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says that they should not intend any worldly benefit or gratitude. Should not expect by teaching that you will be shown some type of appreciation or reward. If you are, then alhamdulillah, you are. If not, then it's not something that you expect. But rather, your teaching is for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in doing so, you do not see yourself above or more virtuous than the students. Rather, you see the virtue of the students as they have prepared their hearts to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the bounty, if you will, of the knowledge that they are seeking, that they are going to fill their heart with. And so, the student is like one who lends land to the farmer. So, the student is giving the teacher the land for harvest. And that's the heart. So as we've discussed in the previous section, the student essentially submits and surrenders to their teacher to provide them the information that they desire. And on the flip side of it, the teacher has been given the opportunity to harvest the fruits. And the reality is this teacher has such a great opportunity in front of them, because whatever the student does with that knowledge of righteousness and benefit, then ultimately the reward will be shared by the teacher themselves. Right? The Prophet ﷺ, he says, "Ad-dal ala al-khair kafa'ili." The one who introduces or steers one to goodness and righteousness will have the same reward as the one who actually does it. And so this is the attitude of the teacher. Not that they're superior and better than and etc., though they may be more virtuous in their knowledge and more acquainted and aware, but when it comes to the relationship they have with their students, they see the student as an opportunity and as a means. And so they should be also grateful for the experience. He says that the teacher should not ask for any payment or reward except from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the pious predecessors, they used to go so far as to rejecting, if you will, or trying to avoid accepting gifts that were given from their students. The teacher should also not hide and store away any advice they have for their students, meaning you should give all of yourself to them, and also try and steer them away from bad manners and poor etiquette by hinting to them as much as possible, as opposed to scolding the student. Because scolding and reprimanding is what rips up the hijab of dignity. And another manner of the teacher is that the teacher does not seek to embarrass or belittle the student. And this is also something that will, in turn, come back to reflect poorly on the teacher and could drive away the student. And so that's one of the manners and etiquettes that should be observed by the teacher. Also, the teacher has to take into consideration the student's mental capacity and their ability to understand. So they're not going to be throwing at them information that they know is beyond their capacity. something that is above their level. And so that's the job of a skillful teacher, is to identify what the student is able to consume and understand, and then build them up gradually. Right? You don't take a freshman and expect them to perform like a master's degree student. And so you just start hammering them with 500 and 600 level classes. Right? The freshmen, they get the 100 level classes. And they grow into the 200 and the 300 level courses. And if you're familiar with, the college, classification system of courses, then the 100 level are the introductory level courses, and the 5 and the 6 are the graduate level courses. Right? So you don't expect a freshman to come in and be able to understand the 500 and 600 level courses. And so the teacher should not use his platform to unload his PhD thesis on them in full, but should build them up so that they can reach that point that he himself has reached or beyond. It was reported that the Prophet ﷺ said, "I have been ordered to address the people according to their intellectual level." Right? You say what you want about the hadith's grade of authenticity, but the meaning here is certainly true. And the Prophet ﷺ, even if you look as a student of the Arabic language, you'll find that you can often understand hadith before you begin to understand the ayat in the Quran, by and large, because the Prophet's speech was very clear, it was very easy, and it was accessible to the lay congregation. So you'll find that the majority of his hadith are very, very simple and very basic, even though the meaning of those hadith can be quite deep and require a great deal of scholarship to unwrap everything that it contains. After that is that the teacher acts according to the knowledge they possess, and they don't let their actions make a liar out of their statements, meaning that they're preaching righteousness and piety, and then you turn around and find that they're of the biggest and worst sinners. They tell you to speak the truth, but then they themselves do not do so. They tell you to pray or to fast, and then you find that they themselves do not do so. And of course, this is in accordance with Allah's statement in Surah Al-Baqarah, أَتَأْمُرُونَ النَّاسَ بِالْبِرِّ وَتَنْسَوْنَ أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ تَتْلُونَ الْكِتَابَ أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. You order the people with righteousness, and you yourselves forget about it, while you are reciting from the book. Do you not think? Ali radiallahu anhu, he said that two have been handicapped. Two have been handicapped, or, they have been, their back has been broken, if you will. The immoral scholar and the ignorant recluse. The immoral scholar, meaning the sinning scholar, and the ignorant recluse. You can understand the immoral scholar, because the scholar is preaching and teaching about righteousness and piety, whereas the ignorant recluse, one that has not the knowledge, should not exclude himself from the company of others. There's no way to learn unless you are around those that know. So he has also deprived himself. The next section here, it says, essentially categorizing different types of scholars. The evil scholar is the one who has intended with his knowledge the delights of this world, or seeks the status of this world. Either they want the riches and the delights, and they use knowledge as a tool to gain it, or they are seeking the status of this world, and so they use their knowledge to seek that. It was reported, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, whoever learns what should be learned for the sake of Allah and does not do so except to achieve some portion of this world, he will not smell the fragrance of paradise on the day of resurrection. In another hadith, he says, whoever seeks knowledge in order to brag among the scholars or to argue with the foolish or to divert people and redirect them to himself, he will be in the hellfire. Waliyadu billah. We seek Allah's refuge. Some of the pious, they said that the most regretful of people at the time of death is an extravagant scholar or a negligent and sinful scholar. He says, what is expected of the scholar is that they establish the commands and they stay away from the prohibitions. It's not expected that they be zahid wa mu'arridan an al-mubahat. That you shouldn't expect that the scholar is abstaining and turning away from that which is permissible. However, it is appropriate that they try and reduce the amount or diminish the amount of the permissible that they partake in of this world as much as possible. And of course, not everybody is able to offer excuses for them, just as not everybody is able to do that, to turn away from the permissible things. Some things you just need, some things you have a desire for, and even the scholarly type, the righteous scholar, is permitted such things. And people are of varying degrees in this. And so the example that he gives is what was narrated, that Sufyan al-Thawri, rahimahullah, one of the great imams, he used to eat good food. It says here, kana hasan al-matam, right? That he liked fine dining, if you will. Okay? So he wasn't like the fast food type, or the store brand type, where you get the ShopRite brand, but he wanted the name brand stuff. He wanted the fine dining, expensive restaurant type foods. And he used to say, "Inna dabbata idha lam yuhsan ilayha fil alaf lam ta'mal." That if you don't feed the animal good fodder, it's not going to go to work for you. Right? Yeah. Dinner's on you next time, baby. Imam Ahmad, however, was reported that he would be extremely patient in very, very difficult situations over something extremely important. Right? So Imam Ahmad, as we know his story, had a very difficult life, and the different stages of his life. He grew up in poverty, and he ended up, tormented and tortured in his older years as a religious leader, and was able to withstand and persevere. And so here you can see, personalities are different, the people's natures are different from one another, and so everyone is as they are. From the qualities of the scholars in pursuit of the hereafter is that they know that this world is debased, and that the hereafter is precious. And these two, the dunya and the akhirah, to them they're like two wives, co-wives. Okay? They prefer the akhirah. They have to live with both of them, this life and the next. But there's a preference for one over the other. And that is that's human nature. And so they prefer the hereafter over this world. They do not allow their actions to contradict their statements. They prefer the knowledge which is beneficial in the hereafter, and they stay away from academic pursuits or knowledge that will diminish that benefit, because they prefer things of greater value. And so there was this little tradition which was reported on Shaqiq al-Balkhi, who was one of the imams, if you will, of spirituality in the early days of Khurasan. He was also one of the great warriors or those that served in the armed forces. He was also one of the great soldiers in the armed forces. And he said to Hatim, one of his companions. He says, "You've been in my company for quite some time. What have you learned?" And he responded and he said, "I learned 8 things. The first is that I looked at creation and I found that everyone has something that they love. And when they arrive at the grave, they have to depart from their beloved. So I have made my beloved hasanati, my good deeds." He says, فَجَعَلْتُ مَحْبُوبِ حَسَنَاتِ لِتَكُونَ فِي الْقَبْرِ مَعِي, in order that my beloved will be with me in the grave, my good deeds. He says the second thing is that I looked and examined Allah's statement when He says, وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى, and he who prevented himself from desires. And so I have struggled and strived in order to prevent myself from those desires until I have become settled in the obedience of Allah the Most High. The third thing he says, I have seen that anyone that possesses something of value, they safeguard and preserve it. And then I looked at the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, مَا عِنْدَكُمْ يَنْفَدُ وَمَا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ بَاقٍ. Whatever you possess, it will cease. And whatever is with Allah, it will remain. And so anything that I get, I dedicate it to Allah so that it will remain with Him for me forever. Number 4, he said, I have seen the people pursuing wealth, pedigree, or relying upon wealth and pedigree and status. And this is really nothing. I've looked at Allah's statement, "Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum," that the noblest of you with Allah are those who are most pious. So I have acted in accordance with taqwa so that I can be of the noble, meaning with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, number 5, I have seen the people be jealous of one another. They become jealous of each other. And so after reading Allah's statement and pondering, نَحْنُ قَسَمْنَا بَيْنَهُمْ مَعِيشَتَهُم, we have divided among them their living, meaning their provisions. Allah says we have divided for them their provisions. And so because of this, I am no longer jealous. Number 6, he says, I've seen people become or display animosity to one another. And then I saw that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, "Inna shaytana lakum aduun fattakhidhuhu aduwa," that shaitan is your enemy, so take him as such, as an enemy. And so I've left off being angry or showing animosity to others and have taken shaitan to be my single enemy. Number 7, he says that I've seen people kill themselves seeking their livelihood and provision. And then I looked at the verse when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَمَا مِن دَابَّةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ إِلَّا عَلَى اللَّهِ رِزْقُهَا. There's not a creature on the earth except they are due their provision from Allah. And so I have busied myself with Allah's rights over me, and I have left what is mine with Him. Number 8, he says, I have seen people become dependent upon business and industry, have become dependent on the health of their physical health. And so I have put my trust in Allah, meaning they solely rely on these things, as opposed to taking them as a means in the process of trust. They put their trust in that, and he says, so I have put my full trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here, essentially these 8 things are showing you what a person has learned, right? And this is the objective of knowledge, is that you can arrive to such conclusions, as opposed to just walking around with a bunch of facts in your head that you can spew at someone in the event of an argument or being asked a question and you can flex an intellectual muscle. But really, gaining knowledge, the sacred knowledge of Islam, is so that a person can be closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and more likely to succeed in their journey to the home of the hereafter. And so these 8 things, which were learned from the teacher, were the conclusions of that knowledge, if you will. He says that from the characteristics of the scholars of the hereafter is that they stay away from the political leaders. You don't find them mixing with them. Hudayfa radiallahu anhu, he says, beware of situations of trial, if you will. Mawaqif al-fitan. And he asked him, what are those trying situations? And he said, Abwab al-umara, the doors of the governors, the doors of the political leaders, the rulers. You will enter into those doors and be in the presence of the leader, and you will have to, or find yourself agreeing with them in a lie. Because they wield authority, a person may feel obliged to agree. Their knees may buckle under such pressure, and they will find themselves supporting falsehood or agreeing with it, trying to justify it in some form or fashion. And you will end up saying what is not true. He says, Sa'id ibn Musayyib, rahimahullah, said that if you see a scholar who is covering for one of the leaders, beware of him, for he is a thief. Some of the pious predecessors said that you will not obtain any of their world except that your religion will be afflicted in a much greater way. So you will lose your faith in a greater way than what you will win of this world from the rulers or political leaders, etc. He also said that from the qualities of the scholars in pursuit of the hereafter is that they are not quick to give religious verdicts and edicts. They're not quick to rush to answer religious questions. And they do not do so unless they are absolutely certain of the validity of their answer. The pious of the past, the Salaf, they used to kind of brush off and avoid the fatwa, meaning answering, until it would make the circle all the way back to them. They would say, go ask so-and-so, and then they would push it off, go ask the next person, until finally it ended up back at their doorstep again. It was mentioned Abdurrahman ibn Abi Layla was a great scholar of fiqh and a muqri, and he was a student of Uthman and Ali. He saw Umar ibn al-Khattab wipe over the khufs. As a little annotation here. He says that I met in this masjid 120 companions of the Prophet ﷺ. There was not one of them that was asked about a hadith or a fatwa, except that they wanted their brother to suffice them in that. They preferred that the next Sahabi answer the question and be done with it. Then it came to the point that these questions were being presented to those that claimed to have knowledge during his time. And they would push themselves forward to answer the question in an issue, for example, that if was presented to Umar ibn Khattab, he would have gathered all the people of Badr in order to seek their counsel and advice before providing an answer. So you find this is during that time, this time of Tabi'een, where, during the time of the companions, they were very, very careful and precautious about answering religious questions unless they were absolutely certain. And then it began to degrade to the point that people would rush into answering religious questions. And claiming to have knowledge, and essentially what that ends up doing is it cheats people. They cheat themselves and they cheat others, because you can often mislead people and cause great hardships for others if you're giving the wrong information. Also, that they are also concerned with the knowledge of righteous actions and that which would spoil them, what would muddy the heart, what would stir up the whispers. The basics of actions are easy, but purifying those actions is something that can be quite tiring. He says that the fundamentals of faith, it is shielding yourself from evil. And you cannot truly do that until you know what you are to shield yourself from. So you understand what righteous actions are and how to go about them, but you should also know about the pitfalls and the dangers, the sins, so that you can stay away from them and shield yourself from them. And also from the characteristics, and this is where we'll conclude, he says that he is looking into asrar al-a'mal al-shar'iyyah, the inner dimensions of the legislated actions or righteous deeds, trying to understand the wisdom behind them. And if he's unable to do that, is unable to discover those inner dimensions and the wisdom, then he suffices himself and surrenders to the legislation. It is also from the qualities of the pious scholars that they follow after the companions and the best of the tabi'een, and that they refrain from all types of innovations.